to help us try to dissect what the lessons of the election are and where we go from here, both to November and beyond here in California. We've had a little panel of people. We've got Senator Mike Morrell, who's going to, you want to be first or you want to be second? Mike's going to be first. And I found I think the best picture of you I have ever seen. Let's find that picture. Is that a good picture or what?
That's my high school picture. Well, it is good to be here, guys. Thank you very much. I just left Sacramento today, so especially glad to be here with people who are normal. So, very grateful. You know, I was in business, as I think, you know, you guys are the ones who jump-started me 7 years ago. I was in business before that, hadn't ran for city council or school board, so I was fortunate to be able to get in this seat. And I will tell you, the first 5 years I was there has been really a challenge. I wondered, is there hope for California? You know, but there's a couple of things that I realized. Number one, a lot of the people leaving California are good tax-paying people. The second demographic, according to the Hoover Institute, that are leaving are highly educated young professional. All these people pay taxes now. The thing is, we have more people coming in than we do going out, but the people coming in are not highly educated people. They're going to pay a lot of taxes to help debt like CalPERS and that kind of things. So there's some real challenges going on. You know, as people have asked me, you know, is there hope for California? That's probably been the number one question I've gotten this year. I have to tell you, again, my first 5 years I had my doubts, but I'm convinced there is, and I'd like to give you a few reasons why, and then you can ask the other guys the real hard questions, okay? Number one, Churchill mentioned it, you know, the politically correct talk has been around for millennials, right? They call it different things, but he talked about the Nazis and the socialists. The reason they can be defeated is because they've ran out of the ability to argue and debate. Therefore, that makes them weak, and the only thing they're reduced to is blaming and accusing and blaming. Ladies and gentlemen, what is our press doing today? That's the only thing they default to. But the second part of that coin is we, the people, have to articulate to fill that void. Do you understand? In other words, so we have to be on top of our game, making sure that we're learning what really limited constitutional government means. And go ahead and clap for that. That's a good thing. We have to clearly articulate that. Second thing, and Nathan Miller, who's here tonight, I hate to give him a lot of credit. But he and I, one day we're talking, the average senator, I think, hires 3 or 4 interns per year, and we were trying to figure out, since the Dems have a staff of 17 and we have a staff of 7, what can we do? And because of him, we started hiring about 40 to 50 interns per year. But I got to a point where I felt like, you know, we want them to work, right, and produce for us, but also we have to contribute it back to them. So we develop a syllabus for them, which has some of the Hillsdale dialogues, a selective... Hey, you know what? I'm just going to take a moment and brag to you guys. I don't mean to brag, but if I brag, I want to brag about my kids. Some of you guys may remember my son David was here a number of years ago when he was just finishing Hillsdale College and law school. I don't think you guys know this, but he now has been involved with vetting these federal judges, as well as a lot of these executive orders that the president's been signing, because he's an attorney at the White House. So. His mother and I are very proud, and he's no longer Mike Morrell's son. I'm David Morrell's father. Just so I'm proud of it. But anyway, the second thing, so these young people that come to us from all these different colleges, most of them are political science majors. A lot of them are liberal guys, and my wife, Joni, thinks this is maybe the most important thing I do. We train them in, you know, some of the Hillsdale dialogues, Plutarch. We introduce them to Plutarch, Aristotle, and some selective writings on the Federalist Papers. And when you make an argument with them, I'm pleasantly surprised A lot of them are Bernie-crats that believe they've been screwed over by the government. The only problem is Bernie wants to solve problems with more government, and we just make the same case to them that no, we want to limit government's power. And I think the difference between their generation and my generation is many of these young people are truth seekers. And I'm happy to say lots of them have come to us and just say, you know, we're political science majors and we've never learned these things in our class. So we feel like we're doing a good work, and I do have hope for that generation. Okay, the third key leading indicator that I'd like to share, and this doesn't mean we're going to win elections right away, but a couple of things. Tocqueville in Democracy in America said that that 700-page book, we have great natural resources, we have this, we have that. But he also said, you know, the greatness is when I entered the churches and saw that the pulpits were aflame with righteousness. And he said that phrase, he says, America is great because America is good. And when we cease to be good, we'll cease to be great. And what he meant is when the pulpit gets out of politics and they don't fight against immorality, right? And many of these churches today have gone, in my opinion, user-friendly, seeker-sensitive, and they've sort of abandoned those things. But over the last 2 years, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what's happened. I've had over 600, I've had the honor of speaking to over 600 pastors, and this year we brought 300 asked to come up to Capitol to be trained to take back our state, and those 300 right there, those 300 right there control about 2.4 million votes, as near as I can tell, between their congregations and their radio programs. But here's the great thing, and I told a couple of you this tonight, I hate to admit this, but for the last 4 years, my side of the aisle, the Republicans, when it comes to those bills that hurt our country morally, we've not stopped any in the last 4 years. And so we got together with these pastors, we put a program together for them, and we explained to them we have to stop this at committee before it goes to the floor, because it's easier to stop 6 votes than it is 60 votes, right? And so I said, what do you guys want to do? And they only wanted to stop 3 bills this year. And guess what? We stopped 3 by the middle of April. And so we've upped that now. And so it leads me to believe that perhaps God, providence is on the move. You know, when I think about that, the great heritage we have, the 21 missions, Focus on the Family was founded here, World Vision. Billy Graham, right up here behind us here at Forest Home, when he was a young man, is where he believed he was called to preach the gospel, starting right here in California. The Pentecostal movement started at the Azusa Street Revival, 69 million. You can just go on. The city of Sacramento means the city of sacraments. What a beautiful word that is, that, you know, communion, holy matrimony. And then also on that land, if you walk up to the north steps of the Capitol, hidden in the bushes are a statue of 3 nuns, the Sisters of Mercies, who donated that land to the Capitol. For the Capitol will be God's capital, right? So, go ahead. So here's what I've come to believe after seeing all these things just happen in the last 2 years. Many people have forgotten the rich heritage God has given this country, but God hasn't forgotten, and I'm confident He hasn't written us off. And so here's why I'm not leaving California. As California goes, so goes the nation. Folks, the good people of this land have to draw the line in the sand, plant the flag, and we have to take back our state because it's ripe for taking. And another thing too, we've been building a base too, which you don't know. We want to win statewide elections, but you know, you build a house from the ground up, right, the foundation. We now have more Republicans by the ground up trying to build a bench and move these young people up in county supervisor seats and other seats like city council. More Republicans than Democrats, even though we're outnumbered with them. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of great things going on, but I think what we have to do is we have to take advantage of this. And again, you know, the enemy never sleeps, man. They work no rest for them. It's 24/7, and we have to do that. And we have to encourage our pastors, people in business to get involved. If you read recently, it was an interesting article about Franklin Graham has come to California. He's here right now, hitting 10 cities strategically, telling these evangelicals you need to vote. And so Gallup poll, you've heard of Gallup poll, they said if only a small portion of those evangelicals over the ones that vote now would come out, we could win elections here in California. And so Franklin Graham is here to try to convince the evangelicals to do it. So you know, those guys, it's been 40 years of one-party rule, and they've ruined our state. The top 500 CEOs in America for 12 years in a row has rated California the worst place to do business. Ironically, it's the #1 place they want to live, though, right? But also, remember, we're the entitlement state. They're taking away our rights. It's a transfer of wealth. Trust me on this. Out of 50 states, we have 34% of the nation's welfare. My wife, I had a fundraiser. I'm going to take down names of who didn't come. But anyway, so Joni was sitting next to a San Bernardino County sheriff, and that sheriff told Joni, they have an influx of criminals coming in now from other states because it's much easier to steal and get away with crime here in California. And guess what? Republicans don't own that. The Democrats own that. The Democrats own that we're the highest tax state. The Democrats have ran some of the businesses out of here. And I've been tracking on my Facebook which gets the biggest hits. It's the gas tax, crime, sanctuary states. And my next thing that I learned here tonight from a number of you is we need to take down Governor Brown and Democrats on their ridiculous idea to limit families to 50 gallons of water, ladies and gentlemen. So in closing, I am 100% confident they have given us the rope to hang them. We just have to use that rope. And all God's people said,
So our next presenter here will be Sean Flynn. As we know, he's a landside Flynn. Sean is an economics professor. He is one of 2 conservative professors in the entire state of California. Maybe, I don't know, is there another one still, or has he left? So he's a candidate for the Congress in the 31st District, and I understand that he's gotten some favorable attention in Washington, D.C., and they may be sending some help his way to get rid of our F- on immigration issues and probably every other issue, Pete Aguilar. So Sean, why don't you tell us your thoughts on the election where we go from here?
So first of all, before we talk about the election, I want to say thank you, Redlands Tea Party. Thank you so much. We won by 83 votes. Beat Pete Aguilar by 83 votes. And, you know, that would not have been possible without 5,000 doors knocked, right? Mail drops. That wouldn't have been possible. People in this room made thousands of phone calls. My team and I are deeply grateful, and we're going to beat Pete Aguilar in November. So, following up on Mike Morrell is a hard thing. I'm grateful for his support and his endorsement, and also the fact that he's both an intellectual, a businessman, and a man of God. And so I want to follow up on some of the things he said about America being good. You know, I grew up Catholic, and one of the worst things you could do, you know, we've got our 7 deadly sins, is lose hope, right? And this is deep in the Catholic tradition, and it's even in pieces of literature like Dante's Inferno, right? He wrote the Paradiso, the Purgatorio, the Inferno, so paradise, purgatory, the Inferno. And you know, there was a message. If you were entering hell in his book, if you were going into hell, into the Inferno, there's a message written over the gateway where you get there, which is abandon all hope, ye who entered here, right? Abandon all hope. And that's what hell is. It's when you abandon all hope. And you know, sometimes as we're fighting the left, especially the secular, godless left, the super hard left progressives, it looks like they have an advantage. Because being godless and not having 10 commandments, they don't have any moral basis the way you do if you're a Christian. And that allows them, in good conscience, their conscience without this kind of a moral sense, to go out and cheat, to stuff the ballots, right? It's sad that we needed people like Carolyn and everyone else who volunteered, Susie was back there, to go out and actually see if the votes were being counted correctly, right? But we have to do that because we're up against a bunch of people who essentially don't see any rules, okay? And you might think that gives them a little bit of an advantage, but we have a bigger advantage, is we're not gonna give up hope in our beliefs, in our tradition, in our God, in our morality, and the righteousness of our cause. We're not gonna give up hope in the Constitution, and that will make us stronger. And at this moment, you know, Mike was talking about how so many people ask him, is there any hope for California? Yes, the hope is in your hearts and it's in your heads. And that's why we're gonna beat Pete Aguilar. That's why, even though John Cox might not be everyone's favorite, he's gonna beat Gavin Newsom. Okay. That's why Donald Trump's approval ratings are going to keep going up and up and up. And that's why we are, starting with this election, going to push back and take back our state. Now, we are blessed in a sense here to be on the front lines, right? If a person who's a conservative, a person who believes in God is living, say, near Beverly Hills or on the San Francisco Peninsula, that's really hopeless. You're outnumbered there like 30-1, which is how I feel at my liberal arts college, right? But we are actually on the front lines to make a difference, right? It wasn't just that I beat Pete Aguilar the other night. Another race, Henry Nickel, who took over for Mark Steinnorth when Mark Steiner's abandoned. Henry Nickel beat James Ramos in his $10 million. We're on the front line here, and we've been given this duty, this obligation, and this opportunity to be the troops that push back. And instead of the blue part of the state drifting out like, you know, you put an ugly ink drop on a beautiful white shirt and going like this, well, we're going to be the bleach. And we're going to shrink it and shrink it and shrink it back. And it begins now, and it begins here. And so I want to encourage everyone that turned out for me, turn out all your friends in November, turn them out for me, turn them out for Henry Nickel, turn them out for all the races, turn them out for John Cox. We will win. And then God is going to give us a little miracle. It was delayed when Justice Scalia died, right? There was a case in front of the Supreme Court about whether the unions could tax their members and use it for lefty politics, which they do. Even conservative members, my dad was a school teacher, and they would dock his pay and turn it around and use it for politics that he just thought was deeply offensive. Well, that's about to end because the Janus decision, if you heard about this, the Janus decision is about to come down from the Supreme Court by the end of this month, and it's going to be 5-4. The unions are already panicking. These government sector unions, they're already panicking. One of them cut their budget, right? They had $100 million in the can for a 2-year budget, and they were going to spend, you know, $50 million this year, $50 million next year. They realized they're not going to get any dues next year, so they just cut their budget for this year, knowing they're going to have to make that money last. And that's good for us because that'll happen in June. The elections are in November, and they're not going to spend nearly as much money as they normally do. And then all our efforts will get this bonus from the Supreme Court, and thank you, Donald Trump, for that appointment, right? Okay, so that's basically all I have to say. I think it's going to be a great year, and if we all pull together, this is the year that we're the bleach, and that ink drop just shrinks down to nothing. Okay, thank you.
All right, I thought I was just doing the panel, but first of all, I ran Andrew Kayuk's race for the 42nd Assembly District. I've had a history of managing campaigns. I actually wasn't particularly interested in running one this year, but when Chad May's issue came to bear, Andrew sought me out, and it was more than a worthy cause. The major concern we have with Chad Mays, and now the fact that he's made it through and may very likely make it back into the legislature, is that he's a poison pill for the Republican Party. When he's up there, what he did with cap and trade, the fact that he won this election was essentially a challenge to our activist base and the Republican Party and conservatives that felt like what he represented was not what a Republican in California wants. And his perspective on that was that we don't matter, that the base doesn't matter, that they don't understand what he's dealing with up there, and he has a better idea of what the Republican in California is. And the fact that he's going back there means that you can expect a little more of that. He's going to be an exceptionally dangerous vote up in the legislature. Not only that, there's going to be an effect on his colleagues that feel that if Chad Mays can do that and survive, then they will kowtow to the special interests up there as well. I'll make a few exceptions. Mike Morrell here in the office as well. He's doing a great job up there as a conservative, but our elected officials up there, by and large, 90% of the money that they raise, and that's a kind estimate for a lot of them, is up in Sacramento. These are special interests that have desires to see certain legislation passed to benefit their industry. They do not know what's going on the local level. They do not know what's going on with small businesses, and nor do they care. All they care about is getting their legislation passed, pleasing their shareholders, making sure that business as usual gets done. And their relationships with those elected officials translate into the politics of business. Those are the people that we call the establishment, and we see those people on both sides. They're up there, and what's valued most is the ebb and flow of resources, benefiting candidates' re-election cycles, because the number one disease that they get when they go up there is the re-election disease, where all of a sudden they want to be careful, they don't want to take too many chances, and they want to hold on to office for the sake of getting small bills passed that don't really move the ball down the field for us. When Chad Mays says that a field goal is a win instead of a touchdown, somebody needs to remind this guy that they're still scoring points on us. That's not a win. We are losing. And until our elected officials are willing to get out of their office, get out of Sacramento, come and join us here in the rank and file in the district, and show up and participate in those activist-based activities, show people that they have courage and start taking risks, we're not going to make a difference up there. They're not going to make a difference up there. They need to be bold, and they need to take risks. Without a risk, it's all going to be status quo, and we're on the losing end of that deal. I feel strongly that we're going to see a new caliber of conservatives running for office. I think we've seen that this year, and I think inevitably we're going to see them ascend into office, especially as some of these more establishment candidates weed themselves out. So I don't want to sit here and go on and on about Chad Mays. I will say Andrew ran a fantastic race. We raised $250,000. That kind of money against an incumbent, especially one that everybody was so afraid of, is pretty spectacular. All that money was in the district. It wasn't special interests. Chad Mays and the folks, you can clap to that. Chad Mays and the folks up in Sacramento, the special interests that sent the mail that Greg was talking about earlier, they spent upwards of $2 million to try and retain that seat for Chad. On the one hand, on the plus side for me, I take that as a win that we put the fear of God into those guys, that they felt that they had to spend $2 million to try and stay in office. The sad part is that money should have been going to our other Republicans, other folks in office that are more conservative, that need the help in their seats. It shouldn't have been going to help Chad, because it's not doing us any benefits that way. So that's the unfortunate thing. I think we have a lot of great opportunities this coming election cycle. We'll talk a little bit about it more. I don't want to take too much time, but pay attention to the governor's race. I know, again, as was mentioned earlier, John Cox wasn't one of your favorites, but he's honed his message. He's definitely a statesman, and you've got Gavin Newsom, who is a nightmare. I don't care how much you like or dislike our nominee. Gavin, you want single-payer health care, you want higher taxes. If we pass that repeal the gas tax, for the one that was passed, SB1, you can guarantee that is going to be worked into the math when they come back and try to determine how much is going to go up for the cap and trade gas tax. Again, thank you, Chad Mays, for that. So that's what we're dealing with. And if you don't have somebody up there at the statewide level fighting that, we're in real trouble. And Gavin Newsom is running way to the left. And that does not represent a lot of Californians, even with these by their name. And the gas tax, the the nickel and diming of small businesses, making it exceptionally unaffordable to do business here. It's wearing people down. There's clearly a tax revolt going on. We saw it with the recall of Josh Newman, and I expect to see more of that this election cycle. So rest easy, rest assured. There's going to be some exciting wins, and that blue wave is not going to be hitting California.
The most active groups in our area, probably the whole statewide, the Banning, Beaumont, Cherry Valley Tea Party. They have their own radio show like we do. They're putting signs out, they're canvassing. They meet every week, and they have our general meeting once a month. They're accomplishing a lot, and they're a little bit of a spin-off from us, so we appreciate that.
I want to
take a little pride in our small role in creating your organization.
Right, I want to thank the people to come to our breakfast meeting every week. They're really working hard and trying to make a difference. You know, before I come over here tonight, I dug out one of my textbooks and I looked up the word wisdom. It's about 7-page long, talking about what wisdom is. And one of the things that stuck out to me is a wise man is a good man. You know, you could acquire a lot of knowledge and experience by going to school and getting a good education. And you can use that for good or you can use it for evil. And a lot of people get the education, they go for the materialism, lots of money, lots of wealth, and all the fine things in life. And they do things that are not necessarily good. But a good person gets a good education, a lot of knowledge, and he holds people up and he does good works. And he's a wise man. And I think, unfortunately, the Democratic Party has been taken over by a lot of people that are really smart. And they got good insight and they look ahead. And I think they saw this backlash coming in California with SB 54, 47, 57, and SB 54, and the gas tax. And they've been planning years in advance. But I think we got the backlash going. We need to take advantage of it. And we need to try to use a little bit of wisdom. And right now, it looks like it's a fight between David and Goliath. They got all the money, they got the media, they got everything. There was a victory. We need to look at the election as a victory. Our group really worked hard for Travis Allen. We put out hundreds of signs. We put out voter guides for Kimberlin Brown and the other candidates, and for Travis Allen. We were really inspired by him. I think he's going to be around for a long time in politics. I hope so. But we didn't make it. But Donald Trump endorsed John Cox for some reason. And I don't know all the reasons. But the goal of the Democratic Party is to impeach Donald Trump. We got 14 Republicans in this state. And the Democrats were hoping to take out about 5 or 6 of them. And by having a Republican at the top of the ticket, it's going to help them 14 Republicans stay in office and stop the impeachment. So that was one blessing of that. I went on the internet. There's a lot of negative comments out there about Cox, John Cox, and these could be Democrats that are doing this, trying to sow dissension within our groups. We need to stay focused. We need to work hard for the candidates we have on the ticket. We need to stop the enemy as the Democrats and the progressive left. And I think they've infested some of the leadership of the Republican Party at the top. But I'm confident we're going to make a difference. Our goal over there is just banning Beaumont, Cherry Valley. Chad Mays, that $2 million he spent, that actually helped all the other candidates by him draining all their resources out. So what Nathan did and what Anthony did, what Gary Gendron did, it cost the other side $2 million. So we're going to keep hammering away at them. We're not going to give up. And I would like to say I got a lot of good, wise people in our group, because they're good people and they're working hard. And we're not going to quit. We're going to keep fighting. And I encourage everybody else, get active. Most people go through life and they never realize how much power they have within themselves. Little David took down Goliath. He was just a kid. So we're adults, we're grown up, and I think we can all make a difference. So I want to encourage everybody, let's win this battle and really, really fight.
Thank you,
So,
Glenn.
thank you.
John, Mike, Nathan, would you come up here? If you have any, stay right there, stay right there. If you guys want to come back up to the stage, we're going to open this up for audience questions and discussions. If you have something you want to say or ask, stay up there. Mike, Sean, Nathan. If you have any questions, come on up here, and I see a great rush. Okay, so in relatively brief answers, what is John Cox's path to 50% plus one?
What is John Cox's path to 50% plus one? I mentioned a few of these things earlier. Gavin Newsom is running an incredibly strong campaign to the left. He's made it past Viragosa. He's in the general race. Usually you start toning down some of that rhetoric. He's amped it up. He's banking on this idea that an uber partisan, uber liberal, practically socialist candidate running for governor is what the people of California want. I disagree with that. I think people vote with their wallets and based on the economy and the experiences they have, and I think that there's a lot of negative economic experiences that are going on with gas prices going up through the roof. It's costing every family an average of $800, some more. And the people that's harming, aren't people in the so-called 1%. The less you make, the more it's going to hurt. It's a regressive tax. So if you're, the working poor, you're going to be paying a much larger percentage of your income on gas. And that's going to hurt a lot of people that commute significantly to get to work. They're going to have to, try to carpool. It's going to create hardship for them to get there, and some of that additional cost may actually make it difficult for them to keep jobs. I think there's a lot of hardship out there right now. That's why there's a lot of resistance to the gas tax. One of the ways I think we're going to get to that 50% plus one of the things you're going to see is you've got several still targeted congressional races. You've got a handful of targeted legislative races for California, and those races are going to wrap their campaigns around repealing the gas tax. And that is something that is a mobilizer, particularly for Republican voters. What you heard earlier when you talk about turnout is an important factor when you're considering these elections. That's why you see completely different results in turnout and percentages in primary races versus what you see in general races. Turnout models are things that they base polls off of, and that is a guessing game. What pollsters basically do is you come up with some magic formula to assume who is going to be turning out, what percentages and what party, and then when they do polls, they ask people that fit into those categories that are registered voters. You'll see in the past, those polls have had a 2 to 3% margin of error, which is pretty tight. Post-Trump, in this new era, every poll that I've seen has had roughly a 4 to 5% margin of error. That's a pretty big swing, which shows you that these pollsters are not very comfortable with the science that's coming out of the polls that they're doing and who that electorate may be that's voting. And when we can engage Republican voters and we do a much better job of motivating them to get to those polls when they recognize that a vote impacts their bottom line, impacts their livelihood, and it can do it consistently. And when you see that their comfort zone is disrupted, those are the kinds of things that get our people out to vote. Those are the things that mobilize them to get to those polls. And I think that is exactly how we get to the 50% plus one. You're going to see a lot of emphasis on that. And quite frankly, what we do in the field. Sanctuary State are fighting SB 54, getting these city councils to oppose it. As we gain these wins, we start to create this momentum that just gathers more and more steam, more and more force. And as we get to these city councils, there's more and more people. When we first started out, and I founded the No Sanctuary group, we had about 150 people at the Beaumont City Council meeting. Then we had about 200 people in Yucaipa. I promised the city council in Corona that we were going to have 200 people at their doorstep. We had over 300 people show up to that city council meeting in Corona. And you know how we win these races with these elected officials? Ruled by fear. These guys sit up there and they vote with a rubber stamp based on what their staff tells them. If 10 to 20 people show up at their city council meeting raising a fist, and those are traditionally liberal activists, they get scared, they act like they represent the entire electorate, and they kowtow to them. When we get 300 people to their city council meeting to make a point that SB 54 has to go and they have an obligation to oppose it, that puts the fear of God in them. And no mercy, no quarter, that's how we take this state back.
Anyone else have any thoughts on the subject?
I think you pretty much covered everything.
Question?
Well, not a question so much as a suggestion about that last talk about Gavin Newsom. Is everybody here, if you haven't seen it, you should see the video of Adam Carolla interviewing Gavin Newsom. I don't know if you've seen that from a couple years ago, especially the last 15 or 20 minutes of it. He exposes Gavin Newsom as a vacuous, vapid, empty suit who knows nothing about anything, who loves to just blab his mouth, but he's constantly saying, let's have a conversation about this, but he won't have a conversation about it. And it's beautiful to see. Anybody who thinks they're a Gavin Newsom supporter and has sort of a typical shallow leftist belief, when they see that, they usually are really shocked by how stupid the man is, basically. And so everybody should see that. It's from a couple of years ago, and it's like I said, it's an hour-long interview, and especially the last 15 or 20 minutes is just beautiful to see. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. Day before yesterday, I had a meeting with Douglas V. Gibbs, the Constitution Association. And I suggested he call Travis Allen up, try to set a meeting up with him. And the reason I did that is because he is one of the most dynamic campaigners I've ever seen in my life. He was just fantastic. And I told Doug, I said, talk to him about staying active. And I'd like to see him walk out on the stage with John Cox sitting next to him and do an introduction and look at the audience and say, you know something? I fought with this guy here and I called him a loser. He ran for several offices and he lost them all. And he ran against me and he kicked my butt. I got 10% and he got 30-some%. So he's no longer a loser, he's a winner. And now that he's broke that winning streak, that losing streak, let's see if we can get him to do it again for governor of California and get out there and start fighting and call this Gavin Newsom what he is. He's a slime ball. He's an adulterous, miserable, sinful human being for the state of California. I don't hate the guy, and the reason I don't hate him is because he's a human being and none of us are perfect. And it's also written in the books that our senator talks about, that if you hate your brother and say you love God, you're a liar. So I don't hate these people. I just want to get them out of office and get them off somewhere else, grubbing after their money off of somebody else instead of off of the taxpayers. So what do you think about keeping Travis Allen active and fighting all the way to the governorship?
Jam.
So I had a question for Sean, but before I do that, see, you talked about God. You talked about hope, and Mike, you talked about there's hope in California. So today we sold our place in Texas because everybody agreed with us there. There's no fight. So we decided to stay here in California to fight.
Today, I signed my loan documents for Texas.
No, but she will still be here. So I had a question for Sean, Flynn. So now you're going to be running against Pete. So what kind of logo would you have? Would you say win with Flynn or beat Pete?
No.
What are you going to say?
Well, win with Flynn and beat Pete are good, but we were thinking no repeat.
I'm seeing the audience questions. For years,
And actually, another one we came up with, Pete's in his second term in Congress. You can't get a congressional pension until your third term. So if we defeat him now with no pension. So it's the other thing we were thinking was no pension Pete as a fight slot.
no, I mean, to be fair, I mean, Pete does have an accomplishment. He was second place in the Congressional beer making contest.
Yes, and God, what was? Oh yes, and the name of the beer was For Pete's Sake.
For years, Republicans have cited the Democrat record of governance. Highest cost of living adjusted poverty rate, highest energy prices now, the highest taxes, worst business climate, so on and so on and so on, and it hasn't made much of a dent. How do the Republicans need to be different, to look different, sound different, communicate differently, to get your percentage, instead of the usual Republican 40%, to get that to the 50% range?
I think Senator Morrell would be the right person.
Good question. First of all of us, since we're governed by consent, you're more important than the politicians because you elect the politicians, right? And so we have to again relearn and reintroduce those principles contained in our Constitution, and we need to take them to the streets. But in the meantime, one thing I've noticed with some of my colleagues in the Republican Senate, they're a nicer, kinder, gentler group of people, and we play more defense than we do offense. You have to go on the offense. Doesn't mean you have to be mean. We have to define, and again, as I said, not Republican accusations, but show a list. These are how the Democrats' bills are authored, and these were passed by Democrats, and we go right down the line and we define who they are. As we've talked 100 times tonight about the gas taxes, the highest tax state, this sanctuary states, bam, 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 and bam. The water, 20 billions towards dams, and yet we have no water shortage. 34% of the nation's welfare. We have to define and clearly communicate how they've messed up the Golden State. And then the second thing we have to do as Republicans or conservatives, we have to show what our political principles are, why we believe in limiting government's power. We believe in local control. You know, I've spoken to, I was the only Republican to go to a convention of teachers, right? And I spoke and I explained to them why I didn't care for Common Core, and I could tell the looks, they were ready to throw me out. But I just simply said there's 9 people that control Common Core. I believe we should return this back to local municipalities because the teachers, the parents, and the school board know better what's for their kids than those people back there in DC. And then the last thing I pointed out is I said, and when we had local control back in the 60s, California was #1 in America, and America was #1 throughout the world. The further governments moved away from the local municipalities is why we need all these programs, because we're number 18 now internationally, and California is somewhere around 46th and 47th in reading and math. And so there's so many things that we have to remind the Americans, our fellow citizens, why we have to limit government's power, rank the citizen above the state, and make sure those public servants remember that they're not masters, they're public servants, and they're there to work and serve at our pleasure. And why, when citizens keep more of their money, why we prosper. If you look real quick, when Jimmy Carter's top tax rate was 70%, you guys remember this, unemployment was 12%, inflation was 13%, and any of us who bought a home back then was 19%. Do you remember that? Ronald Reagan came along, lowered that from 70% to 28%. Businesses, people kept more of their money, and when businesses kept more of their money, they invested back into their business, and your greatest asset are people, employees, and that was the largest expansion of wealth as well as jobs. 19 million jobs in the private sector, not government jobs, that were created. Another thing too, since Americans got to keep more of their money during those days, the thing Reagan was most proud of is there was a 60% increase in charitable giving to churches, nonprofits, and everything. And so it goes to show you those political principles contained in our Constitution, which limits government's power, still work for today. So we have to hang the Democrats by their rope that they've given us. I mean, it's the worst it's ever been. We have to clearly communicate what they believe and make a distinction what we believe, and I believe we can win by that. That's the only way we can win. Last thing, and I'm going to try to hope that all of us keep our answers to 60 seconds, forgive me, but I've been taking a chance and writing, writing op-eds into the Bay Area to see how people will respond. So I go online, probably 80% of the comments are positive, the other 20% other, and that's in the worst part of our state. That's why we can win.
Janice.
Well, I sort of feel like we need to make sure that we know, that people know that we have a heart. I used to be an activist Democrat. I used to run political campaigns for a living for the Democratic Party. And I used to go to a lot of things. I went to a Libertarian Party meeting one time, and I said, but what about those people who are poor, who through no fault of their own they are poor? And he told me something that always stuck with me. He said that the American people are very generous, and that people free from taxation and regulation will open their wallets. There will be no one starving because they're poor. And you know, I think when I talk to my liberal friends, which I still have a lot of, I tell them that story, you know, and I tell them that the people here at the Tea Party are good, generous people. And I don't think that a lot of my liberal friends think that Republicans have a heart.
Well, this one doesn't.
No, I'm heartless. I want to make this quick because I think it's getting past Senator Morrell's bedtime. He said I was heartless. No, I think we have several opportunities to start winning over people from non-traditional Republican, non-Republican sectors. I'll go back to Mike's re-election in 2012. It was a very tough year for Republicans in California. We lost quite a few legislative seats in challengeable districts. Mike's district was the one challengeable district where we won. Everything else lost. And why did we win? One of the things they found out when they looked through all the demographic data in the aftermath of the election cycle, Latinos, women, African Americans, all these demographic groups voted in a much higher concentration and percentage for Mike than they did in all these other elections. And there's a reason for that. Throughout the first 2 years of Mike's time in office, instead of waiting until 2012 to campaign, he showed up to where all of these groups were to meet with him. The teachers, African American Chambers of Commerce, Latino groups, and he didn't go there to pander to them. He didn't go there to make them feel good, to tell them what they wanted to hear. He went there to listen to them. Right off the bat, they think we're demons. So if we're not showing up, they're just going to keep on thinking that. You've got to start by showing up and giving them an opportunity to get to know you. And you can clap to that. It's important. That's what all of our guys need to do. And unfortunately, most of our Republican elected officials don't do that. If they're in a safe district, you know, they're up in Sacramento all the time. And if they're not so safe of a district, they're still going out trying to rally their base, which is great, but you've got to start reaching out to these non-traditional sectors. And it's not just by pandering them, by telling them our values should be your values because that's what we think. We need to get a chance to know them and let them bring that conversation up to the point where they're willing to actually listen to us. You can't just go and talk to them. The other thing I'd say is we need... I'm done? Oh, when you're done. Right. The last thing I'll say is, there are plenty of policy opportunities for us to actually, we need to bring these things into those communities and talk to them about and have a conversation about things like $15 minimum wage. $15 minimum wage isn't doing anything for people out there in those lower socioeconomic communities that don't have a job. That's $5 more an hour that they are not making, and they're not any happier about it. The $15 minimum wage that you give to people, it creates microinflation. It gives them a little bit more purchasing power for a small amount of time, but the increase in prices to gas, to goods and services go up exponentially, and they lose the purchasing power that they had before they had that minimum wage increase. Now, we all understand this, but what's the solution to that? What do we offer that's better? And one of the things that I believe that would be a much better solution is we have all kinds of money that's wasted on welfare and these programs that don't make a difference in people's lives. If we take that money and invest it in things that we value, like helping people to start their own businesses, entrepreneurship-based programs where people in lower socioeconomic communities can create their own jobs and create their own businesses, guess what people they tend to hire? People in their communities. And that's how you generate new opportunities for wealth, and that's how you uplift a community and give them an opportunity for upward mobility. So things like that, I think, make a difference, and obviously showing up is incredibly important.
Yeah, just one thing. Nathan used to work for me, and he doesn't anymore, and there's reasons for that. But the first big speech that I had after I got elected was right here. And so when I left, I called him, and he said, "How'd it go?" I said, "Man, it was great. People affirmed me, they clapped, and just wonderful people." But I said, "Here's the thing that I realized, my ego got fed tonight." But I said, "Nathan, half of our speeches have to go to where people don't like us, and then I got to get better at making those arguments." So sure enough, he actually took me at my word, and we went to this one group. And I remember what he said when he left, or when we left. I said, "So Nathan, how did it go?" He said, "I couldn't tell if they loved you or hated you." It says, and I said, "Well, we're going to go back." And we went back about 3 times, and we ended up winning them. But here's the key: half of it's shown up. The other half is, not compromising your principles. You can compromise your preferences, but not your principles. But the thing is you have to get good at making those arguments, because they're reasonable arguments, and it took me a long time to be able to craft that. But you just got to show up and realize those people are just like us. They're created in God's image. They really want the same thing. We just don't do that good of a job, and I mean us Republicans, at clearly communicating that why government's bad when it's big. And so I just wanted to add to that. So thanks, Nathan.
And we have one last question here. Make it a good one.
Your information about your campaign marketing is interesting. I thank you for that. But I want to ask you a question about something that's important to the people here in this room today. Last week, I had to throw out 2 homeless guys out of the Assistance League there in Redlands, a little thrift shop. And we return 94% of our revenues back to the community in the way of various philanthropies. I had to throw out 2 homeless guys, and what I noticed is that the wonderful elderly ladies that are running the thrift shop were actually physically afraid. We have a community, a beautiful community named Redlands here, that is getting increasingly afraid by these guys that are homeless now. Now, 40 years ago, homeless guys were meek and mild. They were primarily addicts and drunks. You say, "Get out of here," and they left. Now they fight you. And I want to know what you guys' plans are to fix that problem. I don't want to hear about your election campaign marketing plans.
So let me go first here. So I've studied this a little, and if you go back to, say, New York City was overrun by homeless because Mayor Dinkins and Ed Koch and some Democrats were in charge for decades, right? And then Rudy Giuliani got elected, and as you know, Rudy Giuliani cleaned up the crime, and they made sure the subways weren't graffitied and stuff. But they also cleaned up the homeless problem. And Janice, you were talking earlier, Ms. Hauser, about Republicans needing to sound compassionate. And so they went about things and they presented it in a compassionate way. But what you have to do, the basic thing, is if you have a homeless problem, and if you're willing to put the resources towards fixing it, which I think we all are, right? That's a high priority, I think, for everyone, no matter what their political persuasion is. You first have to recognize that the homeless come into three basic categories. One, there are people with severe mental illnesses. There's another group that have real bad drug problems. And then there's another group that it's quite small, but it's there where people just ended up there because everything went wrong all at once. And they ended up living outdoors and you just kind of get used to it. But what you have to do, and this takes money and resources and a lot of patience, but patience shows compassion, is you have to send a social worker out, the same social worker to every homeless person, ideally every day, maybe every other day, and they just make friends. And they constantly invite them in for services. If it's a drug addict, it's going to be services to get cleaned up, into a transition home, into a job. If it's someone mentally ill, it's services to come in. We're going to get you into a halfway home. We're going to make sure you're taking your medication. But you have to do this day after day, and it's really resource intensive. And some people will come in after a couple weeks. Others, it takes 2 or 3 years, especially if they're seeing things and hearing voices, right, to build up a relationship where they're feeling safe enough. But legally, thanks to Jimmy Carter, you cannot, it's not incarcerating like prison, but you can't bring someone into custody for a mental hold or anything else unless they're an imminent threat to them, physical threat to themselves or others, which of course was how those ladies were feeling in that situation. But unless they meet that legal standard, the only thing you can do is invite them in. But of course, inviting someone in for charitable purposes, which this is incredibly compassionate. So Rudy Giuliani figured out what worked, both in terms of, just the practical matter. You keep inviting them in to get them into services, but also he framed it in a very compassionate way. We don't hate the homeless. We're not just terrified of the homeless. We're not scared of the homeless. We want to help the homeless, and we're going to do it, and we're going to put the resources necessary. Now, this lesson, though, has been forgotten in most of the country because the homeless issue went away through most of the late 90s into the 2000s, and people forget sometimes, like how to get things done, right? But we do know what best practice is, and cities need to relearn that. And here in San Bernardino County, we can be very proud that the supervisors and other people, Arrowhead Hospital, got together a couple years ago, the VA, and we've gotten hundreds and hundreds of homeless veterans off the streets into jobs and stuff. So it can be done, but obviously the homeless veteran population is just a small segment of the total. But we can do that, and I think, to Janice's point, we can do it in a way that makes us be the compassionate party. And if we are perceived as the compassionate party, the party that cares about the poor, the party that can deliver like affordable health care, which we can with free market stuff, if we do that, the Democrats have nothing. Because the only thing they ever do is say the Republicans are heartless, vote for me. If we show everyone that we're actually the party that delivers prosperity and takes care of the poor and the needy, we'll win forever.
I think there's another part of that equation as well, and I'm sure there's plenty of creative solutions out there, but unfortunately our elected officials aren't taking action on those, or their voices are stifled. They don't get the airtime they need to articulate what Mr. Flynn just said, and nobody ever hears it. But I think it starts with us. The gentleman that asked that question, I would say, what are you doing to actually take action to make that difference? And I'm not saying that you are or you aren't, but if we're not getting together and we're not going down to City Hall and to the Board of Supervisors meeting and we're letting them know that it's a concern to us and that we want them to take action, we can come up with our own ideas of what the solutions are, but put them on the spot and make them to take an action, nothing's going to take place. We can't just sit there and hope that these elected officials are going to do that on their own. Like I said, especially on the local level, they tend to be rubber stampers, not all of them, but a lot of them, and they just follow the lead of what their staff tells them. That's the local version of the establishment. We need to go there. We need to take action. The same thing we're doing with opposing the sanctuary state is the same thing we need to do to get our local elected officials to take action on that.
All over the United States, each city and police department used to have about 20 laws on the books that they could pick just about anybody up off the street and charge them with vagrancy. And if it was on a Friday, maybe Monday morning, they'd be in front of a judge. And one of the things the police would ask, do you have any visible means of support? And if they said, no, well, you're a vagrant, we're taking you in. And then they'd be in front of a judge, and then the judge would make some kind of disposition for that individual and try to work on the problem. But to me, the big problem is, and there's billions and billions and billions of dollars available, or should be available. At one time, 75, 80, 100 years ago, there was no government programs for people who were sick and old and dying and hungry. There was an institution in every community to take care of them people, and it was the Christian churches. I went around and looked in Banning, Beaumont, and Cherry Valley, and I counted 40 churches, some of them over 100 years old. And they collect a lot of money. And at one time, they would take care of the sick, the old, and the dying, and the unemployed. They get them placed on a farm or somewhere to have a job. And that was their area of expertise, social. And usually they'd try to reform them and educate them a little bit. But that's gone. What's happened is the government's become what we call the tit of the church. And a lot of church officials are very happy with that. Let them take on the financial responsibility. And when you subsidize something and you don't have some kind of personal control over it like the churches did, the problem gets worse and worse, and the morality and everything else goes to the pot, so to speak. So I think if we're going to do something about the homeless, we should probably try to organize some of the pastors and churches and work with the police department. Let's pick these people, get them off the street, get them in front of a judge, and work with the churches and take some of them billions and billions of dollars that they collect and maybe help some of these poor people out. And these people on drugs, that ought to be against the law. And if they're doing drugs, they ought to lock them up and give them some jail time, 60 days, dry out and get off drugs and get a job, or give them another 60 days. So I think you got to use tough love. And we've lost that. And we're really hurting these people. And this is a side effect of Marxism, socialism, bigger and bigger government, and we got to keep fighting. And I want to say something to everybody here tonight. There is something you can do, and I did it, and it was a good investment. I took my credit card, and I went on to Tim Donnelly's website, and I donated $25 a month. And I think I started back in January, every month up through June. And that $25 investment paid off because I heard a television commercial, and it was Cook, the guy that's in office right now. And you know what that commercial said? I'm against sanctuary state laws and sanctuary cities. And if it keeps going, I suspect he's going to be on television saying, I want to go down there and be a Minuteman, and I want to build that wall. So we got to keep the pressure on, but that's something you could do, each one of you. If it's $5, $10, $25 a month, and all the candidates have websites like that. I get an email almost every day from Pete Aguilar asking for a donation. I've never given him a penny. But he's on there asking for $1, $2, $5, or whatever you can afford. And the reason I get that email is because I went on and I got a ticket to go to one of his events when the Vice President of the United States was down in Colton or one of these cities. We went down there and demonstrated with Paul Chapeau, and one of our people actually went in, and he was escorted out by security. They threw him out of the event, but that put me on the mailing list, and they keep looking for that money. But, you know, if 1,000 people were giving $25 to this candidate right here, that would be $25,000 a month. And you could do that up through November. As a matter of fact, I'll go ahead and I'll do that. So.
Thank you. Senator?
Let me just wrap this up, because the gentleman who asked the question said some women at the home is scared. I don't know why they're scared. You didn't explain that. But remember, a lot of the homeless people, good people, misfortunate. But there are a lot of, you know, Prop 54. You've got Prop 47. AB 109, a lot of them are released from these prisons. They're homeless and they are stealing, they're breaking in, and you know the story. If they steal under $950, they're not taken into jail. So here's my point. To clean up not all of it, but a lot of it, we have to stop electing Democrats, because every single one of those bills and those initiatives were authored by Democrats. That's what's going to change the state, sir. Remember, it's up to the consent of the governed. We don't need term limits because they come every 2 years for the Congress, every 4 for the Senate, but we need to upgrade those leaders we sent to represent our interests, and that's by the people.
Thank you very much, guys. Carolyn said we could talk as long as we want to. We just have to turn off the lights when we're done. So, I want to thank you for coming out and your words and your thoughts on the subject. And I'm going to turn it back over to Carolyn. We'll do our raffle, and we will get you out of here. Thanks all for staying.